I am pleased to introduce the next speaker, from prioritizing ethnic studies to the focus on social, emotional needs and equity-based funding formulas as California welcomes new dollars for schools to address COVID. You have had our back. Um, I'm a part of the Equity Alliance for LA Kids, a community-based and advocacy group working with LAUSD to institute the Student Equity Need Index. And Black and Brown communities like South Central will finally begin to receive the resources they need as a result. As you know, LAUSD invested $700 million more into Cine because it is proven to be a model to address highest need schools. Most of all, students will see the services and programs we need to get on the pathway toward equal opportunity. Superintendent, on behalf of the Equity Alliance for LA Kids, we look forward to connecting with you on how Cine can be replicated and moved to other districts across the state. We look forward to your continued support. With that being said, I introduce State Superintendent of Public Instruction for California, Tony Thurman. Thank you.
Mari, thank you. I'm really excited to work with you and your colleagues at the Equity for LA Kids, and you let me know when I can work on your campaign. Thank you for your leadership, because you all are our future. And there are some great things happening in LA and LAUSD. I had a chance to visit and see some great literacy programs to support our students as they come back to school. And of course, great programs to support the social, emotional needs of our students as they return to our campus and as we prepare for instruction in the fall. I want to thank everybody in the water cooler family. I saw Deanna Niebuhr and John Kim and others. Thank you so much for continuing to do this work. It feels like so long since we've been able to be together in person at the great conferences that you've often convened in Sacramento. But I'm glad that you have continued to amplify the importance of what we do for our youngest learners and how we support them. What a difficult year it has been. And I just have to say thank you to everyone who works with our earliest learners, our childcare folks, our preschool folks. I just want to thank everyone who continued to support the needs of our young people in some of the toughest parts of the pandemic, and the work that you all have continued to do. At our schools, many of you know, our classified employees, have been providing more than 500 million meals to students during the pandemic. We know that education is the key to everything, but our houses of education are also centers for the community and for community schools and for resources for supporting health and mental health. And of course, these are the critical issues that I think are going to be important. This time has been so difficult. We've had to try to figure out, what does it mean to keep families safe? Sadly, seeing more than 60,000 Californians lose their life to the pandemic, and nearly 600,000 Americans. And so we've had to get into literally healthcare delivery in ways that we hadn't done before, to really understand how to use rapid COVID tests, and of course now vaccines. And we've been doing webinars with Dolores Huerta and Congresswoman Karen Bass and Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Senator Alex Padilla and others to really promote the importance of vaccines. And now that we have the ability for children under the age of 16, or 12 and up, to receive a vaccine, this will prove to be a game changer for us. And we must do all that we can to help our families get good information about how to use the vaccine. The pandemic has highlighted and spotlighted all kinds of inequities that exist. As I talk about vaccines, it's not lost on me that those who experience the highest rate of COVID infection in the Latinx community, in the African-American community, our Native American communities, are also those who've experienced the highest barriers in getting access to vaccines. And so that's why we were doing those webinars that I was telling you about. We brought in trusted messengers from community clinics like Ultimed, and just really working with all of our community health foundations to get the message out to our families that it's safe to get a vaccine. Here's how you can get one, and recognizing that we are still working on closing the digital divide. That means that many of our families could not get access to telehealth or organizing even an appointment. And so, of course, we've worked hard to help ensure that there are walk-up appointments for families that may not have access to the internet. I'll talk a little bit about that because I named a task force on closing the digital divide. for us. We went into this with 1 million students without a computer. And now we know there's still 1 million students without access to high-speed internet. And so we used the task force to get reduced cost internet, $10 a month for our families. And that's still available if families are looking for it. And of course, while we're planning to move to in-person instruction as the default for instruction during the fall, we know that some families will still need access through remote learning. Many of our families, African-American, Latinx, Asian American, and Pacific Islander, have concerns about returning to in-person instruction. And so we want to make sure that there's quality remote learning available and that families have the tools to get it. This pandemic has highlighted inequities and issues around race and social justice that we were already dealing with, but we've seen them just be exacerbated. Starting with the killing of George Floyd during the pandemic and the trauma that our students have witnessed, so we created conversations about ethnic studies. We brought students into spaces to talk about ethnic studies on Zoom so that other students can learn about it. We've created a model ethnic studies curriculum guide. And many of you know I announced the effort called Education to End Hate during the pandemic, so that we can provide professional development to address implicit bias and explicit bias in our schools. Let's face it, we are still working through a crisis of disproportionality where it comes to suspensions, in particular for African-American children and African-American boys, for Latinx students. And so we're still working on how to reverse it. And our office has allocated $90 million in grants for restorative justice, and that's great, but we know we still have work to do, especially when our youngest learners, children in preschool, in kindergarten, in our early grades, are being suspended and expelled. We don't want to be in a society that propels them towards the criminal justice system. We want a society that embraces them. And we know that there's subtle racism that sometimes, enters into the classroom. And so that's why we created Education to End Hate, to send grants to school districts to help them be able to address implicit bias. We have to continue to have these conversations as it relates to countering racism, as it relates to countering what we see in a spike in hate acts against our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. We've worked with Asian Americans Advancing Justice to help them as we roll out a new curriculum that highlights the contributions of Asian American and Pacific Islanders to help us counter some of the acts of hate that we see. In our Education to End Hate series, we have focused on numerous ways to counter prejudice, stereotypes that find themselves into what gets taught in California classrooms and in our society, changing what is taught as it relates to Native American students, focus on ways to counter anti-Semitism, focus on ways to counter Islamophobia. We intend to continue doing more to support our LGBTQ plus students and to make sure that they have support and to help to keep pushing bills like AB 493 that give school districts the resources they need to share with our LGBTQ plus students so that they are supported. At a time when many of our transgender students in other states are having laws on the books that are providing barriers to their support, California wants to accelerate what we do to support our LGBTQ plus student community, and we will continue to advance the message of education to end hate. The California proposed budget by our governor recently gives us great cause for hope. What is on the horizon, not the least of which is a proposal in the billions to provide universal transitional kindergarten and to create a universal preschool environment in the state of California. That budget also envisions providing more mental health and behavioral supports and wraparounds for Californians from birth to age 25. And so lots of things to be excited about. It's going to take 6 weeks for all that to get negotiated, but the California Department of Education will work closely with the governor and the legislature and the Department of Finance, and of course, all of our advocacy agencies to ensure that there are great programs for our young people from birth through adulthood to make sure that we have the supports that our students need and important resources for tutoring and summer programs and after school and extended learning programs to support the acceleration of learning for our students. And so thank you for everyone in the water cooler for all that you do. Apologize that we're about to meet with several legislators and school leaders from various districts across the state to make sure that they understand the needs of our school communities. But you can always count on us to support the work of the water cooler. And so thank you, Kamari, Deanna, Vicki, and others. I'll turn it back to you and look forward to our continued work.